Thank you, Paul, for the nice introduction. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be back in Leipzig also. I used to live here like 20 years ago. So, yeah, kind of nice to be back here, kind of closing a circle maybe. And yeah, maybe also what I'm talking to you about today also kind of feels like closing a circle or going back. So, yeah, when I've been asked to talk about gestures or the connection to movement and music, yeah, I've been thinking a bit of how to approach that, because that's something I've been doing, or that's a bit how I started out, like working with gestures to control music, to shape parameters of electronic music, to have these kind of more like improvisational and more, yeah, like really kind of expressive setups maybe, and then kind of diverged from that. And over the last 10 years or so, I think I used gestures more in a different way, not so much as a kind of expressive control parameter, but more as something which I find very useful to examine interfaces, like technological interfaces. So a gesture to me is a very helpful piece of information, or like a very helpful material that can show how an interaction between a person and technology, between how interaction between two people can work, and as it also says here, how embodiment can work. So whereas I started out with controlling things, and a lot of the things I'm doing now or have been doing over the last 10 years is really about coupling and decoupling. So that maybe is kind of one of the main things, and that's probably one of the things that also electronic media are good at, or that also electronic instruments are good at. And yeah, I want to focus a bit on that, about kind of creating connections and taking these connections apart. So that's what happens in a lot of the pieces that I'm doing. So yeah, I collected a few themes here that might come into play during this lecture. So gestures, or kind of like a gestural movement, yeah, really has a lot to do also with control and with agency. So it's kind of as a carrier that shows us that I'm doing something, that I'm executing something. So it's very good at kind of projecting intent. So, and as a carrier of that meaning, it's a very useful entity to play with. And so it really then also is about kind of how to what you connect that. So if you have a gesture that has a certain intent, that creates a certain anticipation, what is the result of that, and where is it linked to, and who's in control of these gestures? So that is something that's going to also come into play, like who's in charge. So with these embodiment situations and also these kind of control gestures, what interests me really a lot also is in these kind of technological environments, who has the agency, who is in charge, who's in control of it. So that's kind of a thing that sort of seeps through these pieces as well. Yeah, maybe it's so much for that. So yeah, I already said that I'm interested in this kind of looking at cause and effect and cause and action, and kind of taking things apart again. And I have 8 subchapters, so maybe that's ambitious for the 45 minutes we have. Let's see how far we get. So I didn't do this lecture yet. I haven't really talked a lot about gestures in the last few years, so it's also kind of a bit of a ride through stuff I've been doing. So I hope that's also interesting for you and not just for me. So like I already said, I come from this more gestural sensor control then used gestures in kind of as a scripted way, and then went through embodiment to disembodiment. And now in the end, kind of ended up using more robotic gestures and black boxing. So there's like really a lot of varying degree of kind of detaching what a gesture for a human is within these pieces. So yeah, we are kind of a small group here. If something's unclear or so, if you've got a question, feel free to interrupt me. If not, I will continue.
Well, I don't know, does everybody know what black boxing means here?
All right, well, that's good. So black boxing, I can answer that. It's kind of interacting with an interface or with a system where you don't know the exact parameters of it or the exact functionality. So it means you interact with a system which you have a certain control over or a certain interaction with, but you don't control it like a MIDI controller, or you don't use it like a sensor where you say, if I rotate to the left, then the volume gets louder, and if I don't know, push up this dial, then the cutoff frequency changes. But it's more kind of on a more embedded kind of not so conscious interaction with the system. Maybe that's for now, and once we get there, we go into more detail. So I've started off going into gestures with these kind of sensor-controlled pieces, and I can imagine that this might also be kind of common knowledge here in this room. I'm not 100% sure, so I'll keep that that aspect short. There's this diagram that shows the kind of a basic representation of what a digital musical interface in very general looks like. So the main thing here being that we have something that is a gestural input and, for example, a sonic output, and in the middle is this mapping part where you can say how a certain interaction causes a certain sonic event. And that started off when I was working on these pieces, that this middle part I find is actually the most interesting thing to compose for. So the coupling or the kind of linkage between things is like really a parameter to compose, a parameter to shape, and that's like where, to me, a lot of the interesting stuff is happening. So that I'm not just talking so much, I'm just going to play a very old example of mine, of a ensemble piece with a sensor-equipped conductor who's both conducting the ensemble, and he's also controlling the electronics as he kind of conducts through the piece. The piece is called Point Ones, and that's a performance from 2012, so that already kind of feels like very historic by now. So I'm not playing all the part where all of that is doing what it's supposed to do, but more going to a part where there's kind of already an alteration to that setup, and we can take a look at that here. So here what happens is, right, I think that's the end of this clip. So here, while in the beginning of the piece, kind of the linkage and the kind of the control of it is established, and then as it goes on, there's an increasing delay between things, and kind of the linkage between things starts to kind of come into the focus, and so it's this shift of attention, also often through the through the process of an error or through breaking things, where you, especially also with all the kind of media things, you take a lot of stuff for granted very directly. So if it works, it works, and you don't question so much, you don't focus so much on the interface. And finding modes of bringing kind of the interface to the center of the piece is something I found increasingly interesting. All right, so before we go more into these, maybe we are just going to jump right there. Yeah. So after creating these pieces where the interaction would work through senses that musicians were wearing on their bodies, I started to create a few pieces that work with live video and video glasses, which also function through the use of gestures and through the synchronization of gestures. So there's a couple of pieces that I did that work like that, and the one I want to talk about now is called Unity Switch, and it's a piece where you can see that here in this diagram. People are wearing video glasses, so a bit like VR glasses, but really like a video glasses. So you just you see a video screen, and you have a video camera below these glasses, so that films what you're looking at, and so basically you see kind of a video representation of what you would normally see. So yeah, there are also microphones, so that piece takes place at a table, and there are also microphones, so you also hear everything through two very sensitive microphones. So there's kind of like a digital representation of your surroundings already. But the main part of that piece is that there are in total 8 people doing that, so that have this set up to them. And as the piece starts out, like everybody is kind of connected to their own video camera and to their own microphone inputs. So you see, what you would normally see. As the piece goes on, what happens is that these video inputs are switched. So at a certain point, you don't see your own hands anymore, but you see the hands of another person in that installation. And through that, you then get this impression of kind of switching bodies between the participants. And how that works is that people kind of execute these gestures together, so it's very simple in a way. So I would be looking at my hand, but I would see the hand of another person at that moment. And then a process starts where both people at the same time kind of start moving the hand. And there's a sensation that you're not so sure anymore who's initiating this movement, because it's kind of a constant switching between following and leading. So here the gestures kind of work as a synchronization mechanism. So a lot of what the people are doing within the piece is the gestures are very simple, but it's often the very subtle things that are quite powerful. Here you can see how the participants are sitting at these tables and executing different things. So there are also some music instruments coming in and some other props as the piece goes along. But I don't think we need to focus so much on that. So I think the thing I do want to focus on is how the usage of these gestures leads to a fairly persuasive illusion that you are kind of controlling, or that you are inside of another body. So we can take a quick look at how that piece works. So those are like a small excerpt of that piece. And that's a technique I used in several pieces to create these illusions. Another piece is called Perfect Circle, where the same thing happens between two different rooms, which are completely in opposite parts of a building. And here the same technique is used, where people just get very simple instructions to interact with people sitting in front of each other. So it's like almost kind of like a kind of controlled, almost like therapeutic session in a way, where people get instructions to kind of interact with one another. But it's again through this kind of coordination of these gestures that creates this perception of connection. But yeah, maybe what makes sense to say in Unity Switch, the piece that I've just been showing, there's always this moment where you get into this illusion, and then you switch back and forth again. So there's this kind of constant realignment of actually feeling this embodiment, or feeling this the sensation of having agency over the hand that you're seeing, and then also jumping back to your own to looking at your own hand. So it's kind of a constant kind of alignment process. And in general, that's something that's interesting to me, kind of creating these settings and then also taking them away again. So I feel it's often at least as interesting when creating these illusions or immersions mostly, to take away the immersion again and look then at how the functionality of it is. All right. So maybe we can take a quick look at another piece that has a similar vibe, just so that you also see a few examples and I'm not just talking so much. The perfect circle is a therapy. That was not supposed to play. All right, so here we now saw two pieces that kind of use gestures as modes to really create this embodiment. And I want to focus more on like really an emphasis of taking the embodiment away again. But so yeah, you can already see the main focus that kind of goes through here is this coupling, like putting things together. So there can either be a human performer executing an action and that it is linked to either electronics, to processing, or to also humans reacting to that. And here it is like on this really coupling, using technology through gesture to couple two people together. And now I want to show two examples where another setup is created that also starts with a embodiment setup, but then has the main purpose of going beyond that. One of those pieces is called Sleep Laboratory, and it's a participatory VR music installation, maybe one could say. So within that piece, how many were that? I think 12 audience members go into an installation and put on VR headsets that's kind of changing as the piece goes along. And there are several things happening within the piece, but the main thing is that it's facilitating an out-of-body experience. So what happens in that piece is that you get aligned an avatar body within the VR experience, and what you see is kind of a doubling of the set design. So you perform these movements with your hands, and you also interact with the other audience member and the performer within the 6 compartments that form that installation. And so the main focus within that is that you're lying on a bed and you can kind of look down at yourself and you see your body. You can move your hands and you can move your hand around. And then there's a passage that over 3 minutes, I think it was, or something like that. So the camera that is normally located within your head, obviously, or that is how you see this world, through the eyes that are located in your head. And if you control an avatar, then the video camera that shows the footage, it's located here. And then over 3 minutes, what happens within that installation is that this camera very slowly elevates, just like centimeter by centimeter, very, very gradually, and kind of then goes to a point where you see yourself from above, but you can still move your body. So it's so it's very effective in seeing yourself kind of gliding out of yourself, and we are very sensitive to that. Like even the first centimeter or so, when this shift occurs, it's very the human is very sensitive to detecting that. And yeah, maybe I can show you a little clip of how that works within this piece.
Arbitrarily disturbed and displaced. There's no weight on your shoulders.
So that was the first short excerpt I wanted to play. So here again, also all the gestures that are happening kind of form this doubling. So there's always inside the VR representation of things, of the avatars, of the surrounding, and all this kind of grounding and coupling happens through touch and through gesture, kind of as an interface to establish this coupling. And so there's kind of a blurriness between what happens inside and what happens outside, but maybe that's a bit beside the point for this lecture. So on Ah, yeah. So here you can see, if you see it from the outside, how this body kind of tilts out of the lying body. And this is how you would see it from the outside. So there's always also one person sitting by, kind of partially holding hands or executing these gestures, a bit like somebody would be sitting at a bed when somebody is ill, or like a drug sitter sitting next by. So there's always kind of also this comparison mode between the inside and the outside, or between this, between the immersion that you feel through the interface and looking at it more objectively from the outside. So a bit in alignment with what I said before, what really interests me as much as creating these kind of immersive VR installations, I enjoy just as much this moment of kind of getting out of it again. So this moment of looking at your surrounding. So especially if, as it is here, everything is kind of this double, kind of like a saturated artificial double of the real world around you. So I'm really keen on this readjustment process, and so within that piece also there are several points where you put on and put off the glasses again, and you kind of see these movements from the inside and from the outside. So to me that's like really the at least just as powerful as doing the VR part in itself. And here we can maybe take a look quickly at that.
Person B on the bed will now slowly transcend out of its body. Observe your partner. Humans are beautiful. As everything. We seldomly do. The skin. Oh, the shoulder of the lying person. Oh, the shoulder of the lying person. Apply soft pressure. Follow the hand on the screen. Reset the body. Reset the body.
So of course you can imagine a lot of that is kind of perception based, so it's a bit, part of that is a bit hard to describe without actually being in that situation. But maybe to sum up here, kind of the gestural content really leads to kind of pushing inside, pushing back into the body, or kind of establishing these links between these two worlds. And there's this kind of it starts kind of as a very one-on-one, where everything is kind of lying on top of each other. So the bed is there, where you would also see it in VR and so on. So it's like really kind of a replica, and then it's kind of gradually shifting and kind of facilitated by the movements and the gestures of the performers interacting with each other. So maybe the most pushed forward part in that in the mode of disembodying is a piece I think I did 2 years ago or so, which again uses VR and again uses tracking to kind of create a doubling, to create a double of the performer. So in this case, it's a performative piece, so it's not participatory as the one that we did see before. So I'm here. That piece is called bleed.sim NPC ritual file, so it has a very long and maybe also kind of explaining everything in the title kind of name. So the piece is essentially about turning oneself into an NPC, so into a non-performable character. So in the end, it's essentially kind of a kind of self-killing ritual, and it's called bleed because maybe some of you know the concept of bleeding in and bleeding out in the domain of computer games. So where you have this notion, if you bleed in, meaning that your personality goes into the game. So you start to feel grounded or kind of rooted in an artificial or virtual environment like a computer game. So that process is called bleeding in, whereas bleeding out means the opposite, that kind of this environment reflects back on to how you interact in the world around you. So it's kind of a play on words that it uses this idea that bleeding out also is here taken in the literal sense, in the sense of kind of, well, bleeding out, killing yourself. So it's as the piece goes along or starts off, it has this kind of tracking, constructed body, and that is controllable through hand tracking, through motion sensor tracking, and through head tracking, and several other things. And maybe one aspect that's also worth noting here, or something that I find interesting in the last time, is that here we see the kind of the double of the performer. So maybe just to say, so it's a solo performer piece where a performer would stand just like kind of I'm standing here in front of you. There's a projection in the back, there's a projection on the floor, and the performer then controls an avatar which through which eyes the performer also sees with a VR headset. So it's kind of control, a bit like in a computer game, like a live computer game, controlling an avatar in real time, and the audience kind of watches this. So and the assembly of the avatar of that person is really kind of stitched together from a lot of kind of disjunct elements. So part of it is kind of live controlled through tracking. Some things for facial movements have been pre-recorded. Some of those I recorded. Then there are there's also some stock footage in it. There are AI-trained things from the performer, and there's a kind of a body reconstruction. So we're kind of seeing the body that the performer is assigned to is kind of this collage of materials, and over some of these he has autonomy, over some he doesn't. So it's a kind of thing placed together in a way where where it's not so much a kind of a controlled whole, where one, in a kind of top-down fashion, one person or the performer controls everything, but it's more kind of a combination where parts are being controlled, some parts are controlled externally, some things are stock footage. So it has this kind of post-humanist notion of a body being constructed out of different kind of autonomous things that they kind of play together to create one thing that then kind of feels like a whole. So, and within that piece, the idea here is that using an art context or using this kind of VR environment is kind of a possibility to break the connection to oneself. So not so much as in maybe you would normally do, saying it's interesting to go into a body. Here the idea is more to start off with the body and kind of get out of it. So we can take a look at that. All right. I lost a bit track when I started and when I should stop. All right. All right. So then I think we definitely have enough time for another section. So here, maybe if you were able to kind of follow what the voice was saying. So there's this kind of, it's like a ritual to kind of, to exit yourself. And then there's this kind of displacement of these two bodies being in conversation. And one section is I'm witnessing, how does it say it? I'm witnessing the actions that I do from within. So there's this kind of this notion of kind of perceiving oneself and kind of just where maybe what you feel as your agency or as your decision making is more something that runs along through actions being executed, where you kind of more witness that. So it has kind of that addresses the question of control and kind of who's originating an action and who's in control of an action. And that's one chapter I would like to also address. So that's something I've been doing for quite a lot of pieces. Some of those I'm not showing here. There are some where I also use these kind of video and camera glasses that I've been showing before to kind of use that as like almost live computer games, so where people kind of look through the eyes of other people and to work with control commands and embodiment there. So some of these pieces then address that also in a more participatory way, and I now want to show excerpts of two pieces where gestures are executed on stage in stage pieces again. And one that is already a bit older is a piece called Codec Error, where musicians kind of navigate through a stage and perform certain actions, and it has a quite a I don't know what the right word is. It has kind of like a powerful impetus, let's say. So they kind of have like they move through this blackness and feel like they're projecting like a lot of I don't know, power maybe or so. And and you see that piece for about 12 minutes or so, and they kind of perform all these gestures and actions, always kind of lit in these spotlights. And then as the piece goes on, there's kind of a shift in it where the whole kind of blackness of the setting is inverted, and from that moment on, you see it like almost in work light, not really, but more kind of like a staged work light. But the point I want to focus on now is so up to that moment there was a sense of like of strong agency with these performers, and so you would project that agency upon them, whereas the whole piece is run with an in-ear monitoring or with an in-ear click. So basically all the things that these performers are doing, they have this kind of in-ear instructions and metronome. So essentially how the piece is run, or like what's behind it, actually is kind of more a system that really drives the humans through that system. And towards the end of that piece, and that is the section I want to play for you, there's a mode where, so at one point there's this kind of inversion that we start seeing in the work light, all the devices and all the kind of the tech that facilitates this illusion. And later on then in the piece there's also a switch in the audio where in the PA system you start hearing these instructions and you start hearing the click track. So it's kind of these increasing modes of exposing the functionality of how the system works, and that also brings then kind of a transition in the power dynamics, or kind of also in how you watch these people, because there's a shift from agency to something that has a much more kind of puppet-like appearance. I'm going to play a short excerpt of that for you.
Move head to the side. In 3, 2, 1, now. Take one step backwards. Now. Lights off in 3, 2, 1, now. In the next noise block, the light will go out. In the dark, you will lie on the floor. By this, finishing the piece. When the light goes on again, 5 seconds later, the piece is over.
Why? Yeah, so that's almost the end of that piece. So I think the aspect I want to draw the attention to here is again, this kind of linkage between an executed gesture and how it relates to the system or to the technology behind it. And yeah, like I said, within that piece, there's a certain shift in what that means. And maybe it's also interesting to note that, like, this piece also feels extreme in that regard. But I find it interesting, like, some of these environments also help kind of shedding the light on something that's also in less staged performances also apparent. So there's this kind of the dynamics that the interfaces bring with them is always present. It's more a question of whether you bring it to the forefront or not. So like, as soon as you work with something as common and as uninteresting as with the click track, which is like very contemporary composed music, not exceptional, it still creates these implications. It has these implications that you can kind of just choose to ignore, or you can bring them more to the forefront. And so, yeah, a thing that I started to find more and more interesting is to really bring exactly this aspect to the center of the pieces. So a lot of these pieces are, some more, some less, really are more about kind of creating the interface, and then through that establishing a kind of a mode of interaction, or in kind of an experimental setup where you kind of also observe what that interface is doing to the interaction. I'm just, yeah, kind of touching, for some of these pieces, really just touching on that. But yeah, I want to emphasize this aspect that kind of making the main protagonist of the pieces, this linkage or this connection, is something I've been following up on a lot. And okay. I think I'm wrapping it up slowly now and going to something where I'm not going to show an example to, but as we also started with that question, maybe it would not be nice to jump over that. So a thing I've been more focusing on, like recently in the last year, is working or coming back to working with senses, which I really haven't done for a long while. So I think I just showed one piece. So that's like almost 10, 12 years ago or so since I worked with that. And at a certain point for me, working kind of with gestural control, personally, I didn't really know what to do with that at that point anymore. So after kind of coming from this expressiveness to this, then like really decoupling it. So that had kind of reached an endpoint to a certain degree for me. And now with this black boxing is something that, especially when controlling AI models, is something that starts to be interesting again for me. So maybe I can just say a few words about that. So right now we are at a point where we have these kind of powerful AI models that also produce sound and music, and a lot of them are like very high level in control, so they have like very high level latent spaces to control the parameters to create music out of that. And if you then think you have for example, a dancer or a performer with body tracking and gestural control, it's not really, well, you can think of it in a way that you could use it like really kind of like a control parameter kind of setting. But what to me now starts to become very interesting is thinking of an environment where the system that you interact with is not so concretely controllable. So something where, so what I've been doing before is I've been manipulating the linkage, but it was somewhat more conceptual. Whereas in this kind of black box thing, you have something, you can create links where you control a powerful system through posture or through movement, but it is not so, because it's so high level, the linkage, there's a mode where you cannot completely consciously control it. So there's again kind of a mode where there's a certain discrepancy of how you can execute a gesture without specifically knowing how it works or how the control in a latent space for an AI model would work. So there's a mode of interfacing something that is to a certain degree opaque to you, and yeah, I think I'm not going to show that in detail now. And again, and I think I'm coming back to that, and maybe that's nice because we're also coming to the end of this lecture. So it is again about finding a way of how a human body can interface through technology with a system, and how that linkage can be played with. And in the recent pieces that I've been doing, and maybe I can finish a bit on that note too, is this mode of this post-human mode of thinking, where you can say you construct an entity out of multiple things that kind of have their own logic, that have also to a certain degree their own autonomy. That's a mode of looking at the human, not just with technology, but also even just in its biological form, that, for example, Catherine Hales is proposing. So understanding an entity of something that is constructed out of multiple things that play together, and that these things that play together have a certain autonomy, have a certain agency in themselves, and that not all of these linkages we understand completely. That is something that's very interesting to me. And a lot of these things, what drives me behind these things is, for example, embodiment of oneself. Just kind of, we take a lot of these things so for granted, like for being in this body, having these, interfacing the world in the way that we do, and looking at these kind of experimental setups in a way to question that or to break that, to me gives a possibility to also looking again at how we interface our world also without technology. So it really interests me at understanding these kind of artistic scenarios as something where you can really examine certain aspects of it, how it is to really be embodied in yourself, how it can really be to be connected to somebody else, how it can be to kind of envision being in somebody else, how the kind of the logic of cause and effect can be and considered through that, and also this mode of agency also over oneself, which also is something we take very much for granted. But we also know there are also modes or moments in our life where we feel we're losing that agency, or we're losing this kind of groundedness in oneself for one reason or another. So I think a lot of people know there are modes that these kind of strong perceptions can be altered. And one way of altering them is also through these artistic environments. And and this aspect of coupling, decoupling, putting things together and exposing that coupling is yeah, I guess something I've been doing in the last 15 years a lot, and that is also what I wanted to tell you tonight.